Hey, thank you so much for watching. You need to subscribe. Duh, of course you need to subscribe. And we're continuing our series, Ungodly Leaders. Here's a question for you to think about. What can happen when a leader continually defies God? What can happen when a leader continually defies God? As you think about that, I'm going to give you a joke, but we're going to give the punchline at the end. So here's the joke. Why can't Congress ever be vegan? Congress being vegan? What? I know, you have to wait till the end. We'll answer that at the end. But when you think about what happens when a leader consistently defies God? What happens when a leader is at odds against what God's principles are, God's values, God's priorities? What happens? As I thought about this question, and if you think about it in the Bible, there's a gentleman in the Bible who consistently defied God. And you can read about him in Exodus. And this is Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. When you think about the king of Egypt, this dude, ongoingly opposed God. If you read the story, in Exodus chapters 1 through 3, this is kind of about Moses and how he was born, and Pharaoh saying, you got to throw the babies and all the male babies in the Nile River. And Moses' mom was like, I can't do that to my son. And she makes a little ark and puts him in. This ark is where we get the idea of saving Moses. Hello, babies and toddlers. Puts him in the ark and saves him. Pharaoh's daughter comes along and hears the baby crying. Pharaoh's daughter's like, let's save this baby. It's a Hebrew baby and it's a male. Moses' sister comes along and says, I can help you. There's a nursemaid over here to help with this baby. And so Pharaoh's daughter's like, sweet. And they save Moses. So the idea is Moses gets raised in Pharaoh's palace and educated in all the wisdom of Pharaoh. And it's interesting because he's at such a contrast between all of his nation, all the Jews who are in slavery and oppressed by Pharaoh, and he's living, it's just this weird opposite contrasts. And so Moses goes out one day, sees all of his fellow countrymen being oppressed, and he winds up killing one of the Egyptian slave masters. And Pharaoh hears about it, so Moses runs into the wilderness and stays away for 40 years. He's scared. He runs for his life. Then does the burning bush in Exodus chapter 3, comes back, and God speaks to Moses and says, I'm going to use you to speak to Pharaoh and to deliver Israel from slavery. All right, so that's the setup for Pharaoh, and Pharaoh continually opposing God. Because when Moses comes to speak to Pharaoh, one of the first times, Pharaoh's like, I'm not doing that. I'm not going to let the Israelites go into the wilderness and worship. This is my free labor plan. No, absolutely not. And this is defiant number one. But as you keep reading these chapters, Pharaoh's defiance goes more and more and more and more. And what happens is you have all these plagues. So God says, okay, well, if you're not going to do it the first time, and Moses does the miracle, the snake that he picks up turns into a rod. He puts his hand in his jacket and then brings out his leprous, puts it back, now it's healed. God gives Moses all these supernatural signs to demonstrate to Pharaoh, hey, this is a divine proclamation. And when you dig your heels in and you say no, God's telling you by all these supernatural things that you're in the wrong and God is in the right. God is all powerful and you are not. So then it's the Nile River that gets turned into blood. That's the first plague. And as you go on, Pharaoh says, no, the Israelites cannot go into the wilderness and worship God. No. Again, no. And at some point, there's a turn. After, the Nile River being turned into blood, the frogs that come and overwhelm the land, the grasshoppers, the gnats, the lightning, the darkness. Pick something. All the cattle getting sick, the boils, and all this stuff, these horrible things that happen. And there's a point in time when you read through Exodus, these chapters, you will see that at one point in time it says that God hardens the heart of Pharaoh. It's interesting to think about that because there is a point in time we have free will. leaders have free will and get to choose, get to make their own decisions. But if they consistently, ongoingly defy, resist, oppose the purposes, plans of God, if you say no again and again and again, resistant to God, and it's always the same resistance, there's a point where God says, okay, fine, then I will harden your heart, and I will let your heart become so resistant, so hardened to the things of God, that it will be your demise. It will be your ultimate destruction. And that's what happened to Pharaoh. And it's interesting, one of the things I want you to consider is that all of these 10 plagues, some Bible theologians say that those 10 plagues were God's judgment on the gods, little g, gods of Egypt at that time. The Egyptians worshipped the Nile, the Egyptians worshipped, cattle and frogs, and they worshipped the sun and the moon. So the Egyptians had a whole variety, a plethora of gods, little g's, that God was judging and ultimately communicating to Egypt, I am the all-powerful, the one and only true God. I'm the God of the Israelites, and I'm the God of the world. And so when you continue to resist and oppose, then God says, I'm taking the things that you do worship and helping you to see what they really are, especially in contrast to who God is. But Pharaoh being resistant at the end of it, his resistance was in many respects kind of the destruction of Egypt. By the time you look at the accumulative effects of all these plagues on the land of Egypt, Egypt is completely decimated. There's no crops, people are starving. The firstborn of every single family of all the animals in Egypt, by the end of the plagues, the 10th plague, they're all killed. This country, by the time we get through 10 plagues, is completely leveled. And by the time we get to the 10th plague, Pharaoh's like, okay, you win. You can go. The Israelites that's fine. No, we'll let them go. And the Israelites go into the wilderness. They escape. And then Pharaoh changes his mind again. He's like, I'm not letting all that free labor go. And he chases them with all of his chariots. He chases them, and the Israelites are at the Red Sea, and it's bad news. It's the Red Sea here, and Pharaoh coming behind. And they're literally not a rock and a hard place. They're in between the sea and a Pharaoh's army. And God opens the Red Sea. The Israelites walk through on dry ground, and Pharaoh chases them. And God closes the Red Sea on Pharaoh, all of his chariots, and they all drown. So when you think about and you ask the question, what can happen when a leader consistently defies God? Pharaoh. Pharaoh is an example to consider. So what I would say, you're like, wow, that's a little scary and a little disturbing to think about that. Well, what I would encourage you to do, and I think this is one thing I would very much push you in this series, is in 1 Timothy 1, verses 1 and 2. We are instructed from Paul to pray for our leaders. Pray. Pray for the leaders, that they would have a softening of their hearts and that they would agree with God's purposes and plans. So as we finish this episode, here's the answer to your Congress vegan joke. Why can't Congress ever be vegan? Because all the turkeys playing chicken in a beef over pork is pretty fishy. Oh my goodness. You have to hear that again. Go back and hear that because it's really funny. Catch you next week.